Everyone on YouTube today, whether they want to admit it or not, is obsessed with the views. Nowadays, it's hard to find someone making content on this platform that doesn't at least have the dream of getting a large view count in the back of their mind. But no matter how many views your content may have, there is a level of popularity that's completely unattainable for even the site's largest creators. The most viewed YouTube video is a prestigious title to have, and whenever the label changes hands, it always becomes a historical event for the internet. It's a class of video that's rarely been easily in reach for the average user, now so more than ever, but there was one point in time when that wasn't the case. In the early days of the platform, back before influencers were regularly getting 9-digit view counts, it was much more achievable for a dedicated enough person to get lucky and reach the top of the leaderboard if they were at the right place at the right time. Despite the site gaining mainstream traction early into its life, the community it garnered was still relatively niche in its early years, so it'd obviously be noteworthy if any piece of content garnered enough outside attention to have that high of a view count. And of course, whenever there's a race to the top, there will inevitably be people doing anything they can to get their mark on history secured, and a then-growing enterprise like YouTube is no exception. For a brief period in 2008, one video in particular suddenly shot up the site's rankings, eventually becoming the most viewed video on the platform, before disappearing in a cloud of controversy just as quickly as it came. And while the creator that video left was quickly forgotten, the impact it left was an undeniable influence on the way we perceive online success on these kinds of platforms. But before we can get to all that,
want to listen to some tunes?
Cansei De Ser Sexy, later referred to as simply CSS, was a Brazilian indie-tronica band formed essentially out of happenstance. The members all met either through the club scene in their town of Sao Paulo or through early social media, as their lead singer Love Fox was a minor celebrity on the site Photolog. They would officially form in September of 2003 with a nebulously limited amount of musical experience, and through a few years of constant practice developed a signature style of grungy and self-awarely hedonistic celebration of American celebrity culture, a style that would eventually see mainstream appeal in the States, but for now was locked in the niche subcultures the members of CSS were surrounded by. This philosophy even extended to the band's name, which is a rough translation of an alleged Beyoncé quote where she claimed to be tired of being sexy, which Love Fox thought was a funny and out-of-character thing for her to say considering she's Beyoncé. By early 2004, the band had amassed a decently sized audience on Trauma Virtual, a Brazilian music posting site, and would release their self-titled debut album in October of 2005 after signing to the site's record label. The debut reportedly didn't do that well sales-wise, but their earlier EPs had already given them a dedicated enough following to where that wasn't really an issue. Plus, like I said, most of their fanbase came from niche internet music circles, so in a pre-Gangnam Style world, that doesn't translate to traditional success just yet. Considering everything, it's safe to say CSS went to some impressive places relatively early into their career. They were playing at European music festivals, they were landing spots in international advertisements for major TV shows like Big Brother and The Simple Life, and they even got one of their songs featured in the Sims 2 Nightlife expansion pack soundtrack as a Simlish cover, though this version of the song has seemingly gone unarchived, unfortunately. Despite this popularity, however, at this point in their careers, they would still be considered up-and-coming, and it'd be difficult to point to any one song as the one they'd be the most well-known for. All of this effort would eventually draw the attention of Sub Pop Records, who signed the band in early 2006 and would re-release their debut internationally in July of that year. This re-release would give the band its biggest push yet, being the point where their singles would finally hit music charts, most notably with 2 songs reaching the top third of the Billboard dance charts. But still, even after getting their foot in the door, it would take a while before the series of events that finally give them some much-needed recognizability would occur. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we should see how the band first crossed paths with a different character in this story. In February of 2007, CSS partnered with Italian video site Cube TV to host a contest where fans were tasked with editing raw green screen footage of the band into a music video for their song Alcohol, with the creator of the best video receiving €2,000 and some exclusive merchandise. A photographer based in Italy named Claris Bartel would download the footage but chose not to participate in the contest, instead flexing his creative muscles by editing the video to fit with a different CSS song, Music Is My Hot Hot Sex, and on a whim deciding to upload it to his YouTube channel on April 9th. Claris admittedly didn't have any expectations with this video, and naturally it didn't really go anywhere relatively. By late October it had just under 90,000 views, which for the time is respectable, but wouldn't even make it the most popular video featuring the song, and would be nowhere near any sort of YouTube accolade. For some reference, the most popular YouTube video at the time was Judson Laipley's Evolution of Dance, which had been #1 for around a year and 5 months, and in the same October that Clarus's video hit 90,000, Judson's video would effortlessly pass over 60 million views. So the thing that eventually takes over the top spot isn't just gonna come out of nowhere and immediately dethrone a number like that. And I won't bury the lead here, Claris Bartel would be considered the main character of our story, but they're not necessarily one of the driving forces behind what goes on. And the way they became important to the narrative only happens through a handful of outside forces. But before we get more ahead of ourselves, let's jump back a bit to introduce the final piece to this puzzle. On September 11th, 2007, a college freshman at England's University of Leeds named Nick Haley would upload a fan-made commercial he had created for Apple's then newly released product, the iPod Touch. Nick Haley was a lifelong fan of Apple's products, getting his own Macintosh computer at the age of 3, and was inspired to make the video after listening to a song he discovered recently called Music Is My Hot Hot Sex by the band CSS. Specifically, one of the lines towards the end,
"My music is where I'd like you to touch."
Within its first month, the video had garnered a little over 2,000 views and a fairly positive reception, with viewers especially impressed by the video's production value. Some of those viewers, in fact, were members of Apple's very own marketing division, who got the company's main advertising agency to get in contact with Haley. According to Nick, he initially didn't believe the email was real when he first received it. Eventually, he was convinced and ended up being flown out to Los Angeles to work on a TV-quality version of his commercial. Haley talked to the press covering the story about how surreal of an experience it was, since he was only studying politics at Leeds, with creative endeavors only as a side hobby up until that point. He also talked about how much his creative input was taken into consideration with the team, which the chief creative officer of the company, Lee Clow, told the New York Times was integral to conserve the youthful amateur filmmaker feel from the initial video that he was originally charmed by. After about a month of work, on October 26th, the high-quality version of Nick Haley's commercial would officially begin airing on television. And October 26th just so happened to be a pretty good day for TV, with one event in particular being important for our story. That being Game 4 of the 2008 Major League Baseball World Series, which Haley's ad would air within the commercial breaks of, and was an event being watched live on air by just over 20 million viewers. And that's just the biggest example. It's fair to say that millions more people watched the commercial from all of its subsequent airings on plenty of other noteworthy shows I didn't bother looking up. This massive boost in attention and acclaim was of course very big for Nick Haley, who after this point would begin a lifelong career in the behind-the-scenes of advertising, more specifically as the creative lead in several major ad agencies. The commercial success also, more generally, while not being the first example, was an important one in establishing the power advertising had on the popularity of music in the digital age. And it was also a big wake-up call for the advertising industry as a whole, that the creative spirit and homegrown ingenuity that small-time creators from this newly popularized internet possess could be used as a way to connect with audiences in then unprecedented ways, which was a major factor in the direction the aesthetics of advertising took during the rise of online content creation. And speaking of connecting with audiences, one aspect of the commercial in particular drew a lot of viewers' eyes, and that was the song playing in the background, which of course meant that CSS was about to get one of the biggest boosts in international attention they had ever received. Now surprisingly, this wouldn't be the first major promotional deal CSS have had with a tech company. In November of 2006, Music Is My Hot Hot Sex would also be used in a commercial for Microsoft's Zune media player with these weird animated lion and gazelle characters. In fact, a handful of CSS songs and music videos were pre-installed on the Zune, but despite this deal going further than Apple's, this ad spot didn't lead to much in terms of publicity. But the iPod commercial, in contrast, brought the band a massive boost almost immediately. The song would be released as a single internationally shortly after the commercial aired, and in the 2 weeks afterwards, the song became the 15th highest downloaded song on iTunes, and by the end of November had climbed to number 43 on the Billboard Pop 100 chart, a chart that focused mainly on digital downloads and radio requests. And by December had peaked at number 63 on the Billboard Hot 100. Their debut album went from selling around 3,000 copies a week on release in the US before petering out, to selling 2,000 copies in the weeks following the commercial's launch and peaking at number 9 on the electronic album charts by November. When asked about the story, the members of CSS were all incredibly grateful that something like this could happen to them, and vowed to keep the unexpected international original momentum of the song going on their subsequent releases. And not for nothing, their follow-up album in 2008, Donkey, did pretty well on the charts in a number of countries, though unfortunately didn't make much headway on the Billboard 200. But with all this talk about boosted publicity, you may have noticed there's one platform in particular I've neglected to mention. As we've established earlier, one of the reasons this series of events was so out of left field was because Music Is My Hot Hot Sex wasn't a song the band paid much mind to initially. Hell, it wasn't even a single until Haley's iPod commercial forced it into the spotlight. And one of the more emblematic aspects of this is that the song never received an official music video, because it's just a random album track, why would it? So that left the people who primarily consumed popular music through YouTube a little out of luck. But fortunately for them, others had taken it upon themselves to make their own visuals for the song and upload them to the platform, like, for example, our good friend Claris Bartel. After Music Is My Hot Hot Sex blew up from the iPod ad, Claris's video began to steadily increase in views. The timeline isn't fully clear since the in-between points are relatively obscure, but by the end of November of 2007, the video had jumped to 500,000 views. And that ball absolutely kept rolling, as a few months later in February of 2008, the video reportedly had over 20 million views. So on top of watching a song he liked finally garner some outside attention, Clarus and his video were also unintentionally wrapped up in this surprising influx of popularity Nick's commercial had initiated. In fact, and take this with a grain of salt, I wasn't able to fully confirm this, but some sources from the time did claim that Nick Haley was inspired to use the CSS song in his commercial because he saw Clarus's video. So there could be a chance that Claris Bartel was the one who unknowingly planted the seed for his own success. But despite this rapid influx of attention, this wouldn't be the end to the video's rise, and perhaps all that attention would turn out to be more than its creator had hoped. On February 13th, 2008, after the count not moving that significantly, the views on Claris Bartel's video began to rapidly and consistently increase, with seemingly no catalyst in particular. Out of nowhere, the video was gaining a little around 5 million views per day, so by the 17th, the video would pass 40 million views, landing it in the top 10 most viewed videos on the site, and then, on the 29th, the video would pass 76 million views, and officially overtake Evolution of Dance as the most viewed video on YouTube. Now, Evolution of Dance had been resting on its laurels for a little under 2 years at this point. There were videos that were getting close to beating it in views, but the moment something big did come to overtake it would be a pretty important event for the site's history. So the fact that a relatively unimportant or unviral video had randomly spiked in views in the span of a single month and took the title for itself out of nowhere was a pretty big deal, and it was definitely something people were interested in looking into. The main man investigating the validity of this video's rise was a blogger named Andy Baio, who, just as an aside, is an interesting guy in his own right. He would be on the board of directors and later become the chief technical officer at Kickstarter. He was a co-founder of the XOXO Online Creator Conference, and he's been responsible for a number of online ventures, the most famous of which being the collaborative calendar site upcoming.org, which would eventually be acquired by Yahoo in 2005. Baio's also no stranger to online virality. He was the person who initially uploaded the Star Wars Kid video. He created the chiptune Miles Davis tribute album Kind of Bloop, which was embroiled in an infamous legal battle involving the copyright of the original album artwork, and he's also apparently the person to coin the term supercut to refer to a compilation of similar video clips. So suffice to say, Andy Baio's interest in both the potential in online creativity and emerging technology made him a worthy candidate to confirm or refute the authenticity of this sudden spike in views. And he was also responsible for a lot of really good documentation about this story, including a few interviews with Claris Bartel himself. So big shout out to Andy Baio, because without him this video would be much worse. One of the more reliable methods of detecting foul play in view counts back in the day is checking the ratio between views and other interactions with the video, like ratings or shares. So Baio went and scraped the YouTube API for the analytics of the top 500 videos on YouTube to compare the average views to ratings ratio with Bartel's video. And although his raw data has since been lost to time, what was reportedly found seemed pretty damning. And he says that the average video in the whole group he checked has a 540:1 ratio, meaning for every 540 views you'd expect to see a viewer rate the video. And that count goes up to 590 once you enter the top 10. Claris Bartel's video, on the other hand, had a staggering 21,487:1 ratio, a discrepancy of close to 40 times in size. There were also a handful of other outliers with similarly high ratios, but most of those could be more easily explained as just being clips embedded onto other sites that would mostly get outside traffic, where engagement like ratings would be less likely to occur. But for Bartel's video, there was no external source for these views that would merit the same explanation. Now, that alone alone seems like enough to conclude something's up with the view count, but keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily mean that these were botted views, or even that Claris Bartel himself was responsible for these inflated numbers. Another important factor to look into is the video's metadata, specifically the video's tags, the additional keywords you can add to a video to help it in the search algorithm. Before, during the initial spike in views after the iPod commercial, Claris was pretty conservative when it came to the tags, only having a handful of relevant terms to the name of the band. But by the time the video was spiking in views again, the amount of tags had grown significantly, and their relevance to the actual contents of the video had become questionable. There were some meant to connect the video to the commercial, like Apple or Nick Haley or iPod Touch, and some that were technically a part of the video but were made into separate terms to further the video's reach, like computer or boyfriend or sex. But then there's those two last ones, Barack Obama. On first glance, you might think that tag is completely unrelated to the video, and don't get me wrong, it definitely is, but it's actually more relevant to Claris Bartel than you may think. You see, despite being an Italian man living in Italy, Claris was incredibly invested in the success of Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. In the beginning of the year, he changed his whole channel's branding to be Obama campaign related, and when the first round of primary votes happened, he briefly added the phrase "Vote Obama 08" in all caps to the video's title. So Obama's name in the tags might have been another example of Claris giving himself an artificial boost with better search terms, but it's also likely it was just him finding another excuse to talk about his hyperfixation. But either way, Claris was definitely aware of the tactics that he could use to boost his video's visibility, but clearly that alone isn't enough to explain the sheer volume of new viewers he received. And even with all this new scrutiny, that didn't stop the video from gaining even more momentum. On March 7th, YouTube finally decided to take action and removed the video from the official leaderboard while they were investigating its legitimacy. It's worth noting, however, that the video still remained public and viewable, so even that, on top of more reporting on the scandal from major outlets, didn't stop it from gaining new views. In fact, the video would mark another milestone just a few days after this, as on March 11th, 2008, Claris Bartel's Music Is My Hot Hot Sex video became the first upload on YouTube to surpass 100 million views. After a week of investigating, YouTube determined that no foul play had been used, and the video was reinstated on the top of the list on the 18th. From the things I've read, the consensus at this point seemed to be that, although clearly something fishy had been going on, Claris himself was most likely not involved in whatever was happening to the video. And to this day, the mechanics of what actually caused this out-of-nowhere burst of attention are still unclear. However, by this point, Claris was getting sick of all the negative attention that this controversy was throwing his way. So during the investigation, he had disabled comments on the video, and quickly after it was put back up on the charts, he would unceremoniously delete the clip from the platform. Claris had said he thought about deleting the clip before, but was discouraged by people around him so they could see how YouTube's investigation ended up. But by the time that had ended, he had already received enough negative comments to where he wasn't as attached to the idea of his success or clearing his name. When asked about how he felt about deleting the video, Claris's only comment was sad but relieved. If only I had earned $1 or $2 or a job offer, I'd feel different today. And so, after all that turmoil, the situation would naturally conclude of its own accord. Claris Bartel went on to continue his normal, unfamous life. Evolution of Dance went on to reclaim its top spot as the most viewed YouTube video, and everyone went back to the fun, fair competition of seeing who could make the most viewed YouTube clip without all of that view manipulation nonsense. Right? Why isn't the video stopping? Well, you see, this whole situation appears to have been a wake-up call for a small subset of YouTube users, who were now given the idea they could easily gain notoriety and infamy simply by artificially pushing themselves to the top of the leaderboard. And since YouTube was a smaller and less secure operation back in the late 2000s, something like this not being a fluke and happening both intentionally and more than once wasn't an unreasonable possibility. By the middle of 2008, the most viewed videos were becoming flooded with manipulated numbers, one of which just so happened to go far enough to become the most viewed video on the platform. Now, as a disclaimer, information about these examples is a bit more scarce, both because these weren't videos with pre-existing mythos or staying power, and because the manipulation on display here was a lot less debatable. But a few months after Claris deleted his video, in May of 2008, a new video began rapidly gaining views, and it was a bit more blatant where all this attention was coming from. You see, on August 10th, 2006, a Mexican YouTube user named Diuzge uploaded an AMV Frame V of clips from Neon Genesis Evangelion set to a song by punk rock band Panda, and it had been doing pretty decent numbers for a while afterwards. After a little over a year, the video had garnered about 60,000 views, and it was still growing pretty steadily. However, something changed when May of 2008 rolled around, since by the 8th, the video had reportedly breached the top 5 most viewed videos. And on confirmably by the earliest May 13th, 2008, the user's video had also overtaken Evolution of Dance as the most viewed video on the site. And there were a handful of other videos that were suspected of being botted that would enter the top 10, with some of them, allegedly from dubious sources, also making it to the top spot. However, as much as a scourge on the platform these were at the time, after a while they would either get removed from the leaderboard or their views would abruptly stall out at a certain point. So the epidemic of artificially boosted videos topping the site was fortunately a short-lived issue, even if some of them did linger on the chart a little while after they had their peak. And so, once again, Evolution of Dance reclaims its spot as the most viewed YouTube video. But interestingly, a seemingly legitimate contender for its spot had been tightening its race against it in the background this whole time. For some context, one of the biggest pulls for the average early YouTube user up to this point had been the ability to watch music videos for their favorite songs on demand, and they're still a major driving force of the platform today. I mean, depending on how loose your definition is, all but one of the top 30 most viewed videos on the site at this very moment are entirely music videos. So naturally, you'd expect to see a decent amount of music videos on the early most viewed videos chart, back when they could still be rivaled by other genres of content. And throughout this whole story, one music video in particular had been looming in the background, waiting for its time to shine. On February 27th, 2007, RCA Records would upload the music video for the song Girlfriend by Avril Lavigne to YouTube, and it had been steadily accruing views for the past year our story had been taking place. There wasn't anything particularly eventful regarding why the Girlfriend video got as big as it did. It was pretty much just the fact that it was a big comeback single off the sophomore album of a then white-hot star, along with the song just having a more pop-friendly, accessible sound than her older material, which both meant more people could like the song and that more people would give it attention by talking up how big the damage to Avril's artistic integrity it did. Either way, by the middle of June 2008, the video had been catching up to Evolution of Dance's record of just under 90 million views, being only a little under a million views away, and Avril Lavigne's fans were very eager to see their favorite artist receive the prestigious title of most viewed YouTube video. In fact, one group of Avril fans in particular were determined to help reach that goal by any means necessary. On June 19th, 2008, the owner and administrator of the Avril Lavigne fan forum Avril Bandaids posted a call to action to beat Evolution of Dance's view count, with a secondary goal of getting the video over 100 million views, and that they had a, quote, secret weapon to give themselves a leg up. In the post, they linked to a web page that had been programmed with the video embedded into it that would automatically refresh every 15 seconds. And this was back when simply opening the video page counted as a view, so if enough people were on this site for a decent amount of time, the views it would generate would easily build up. The link to this autoplayer would quickly be spread around Avril fan circles and later the general internet, before naturally catching the attention of news outlets for just how surprisingly blatant of an attempt at view manipulation this was. And of course, since it was in recent memory, they usually make sure to bring up the whole Claris Bartel incident, even though that situation doesn't feel very comparable to this one outside of the surface level stuff. It's pretty unsurprising that a little stunt like this would draw the ire from publications like this, which was not only a blow to the fan forum's reputation, but to a certain degree to the reputation of Avril herself, which was already shaky given the backlash to her new sound. However, according to these Avril fans in particular, any publicity would be good publicity, and as it turns out, they apparently had more aces up their sleeve than these outlets had previously thought. On the 26th, the same admin of Avril Bandaids that started all of this would make another post, revealing that this whole view manipulation scheme was nothing more than a publicity stunt to bait online news outlets into drawing more attention to the Girlfriend video and its race for the top spot. In the post, they gloat about having easily played these news sites into inadvertently giving the music video even more publicity by covering their fake scandal, and send the message that they'll be laughing to the proverbial bank once the video does reach the #1 spot off the back of this phony outrage that they had intentionally initiated. Now, personally, I'll take any opportunity to clown on Perez Hilton as much as the next guy, but I, for one, don't believe them for a goddamn second. The post reads less like a reveal and more like a rushed explanation to get out of any hypothetical punitive trouble this whole stunt may have put them or their forum under. The way this was written reeks of pretending you knew what you were doing the whole time, and the more I think about what they did through the lens of a deliberate scheme, the less sense it all makes. The biggest issue being that, despite whatever the admins of the site may say, they did in fact make a webpage that automatically automatically refreshes the music video, and made a call to action within a group of people who weren't in on this supposed bit, thus actually giving the video illegitimate views. They show off that the player had only added about 100,000 real views, as if them not getting millions means anything, but for one, I think anyone watching this would agree when I say I would kill a man for 100,000 views, and two, that's still a decently sized chunk of views the video otherwise wouldn't have had, and they were still on the count as if they were legitimate. So no matter what intentions you layer onto it after the fact, you guys still did the thing you said you were trying to do. And hell, even in this post, they admit the real views the girlfriend video received in the time their auto refresher was up were par for the course for what the video was receiving before all of this. So the plan to boost its numbers by creating an artificial controversy surrounding it didn't even work even if it was real from the start. But either way, regardless of how successful either version of this campaign was, the girlfriend video would still continue to increase in stature. And although the fan forum scheme didn't have the greatest impact, it'll still be lingering in the background for the rest of the story. Over the course of the next few weeks, the video's view count would continue to climb, until finally, on July 28th, 2008, Avril Lavigne's Girlfriend would become the third piece of content to overtake Evolution of Dance as the most viewed video on YouTube. And it's also the first music video to receive the title, or at least official music video, a genre which, as we know a few years later, would completely overtake more traditional forms of content on the most viewed list. But despite this achievement for Avril and her team, the stink of controversy was still strongly surrounding this video's now infamous rise. Plenty of outlets that reported on the event would naturally call back to the Avril Bandaids incident, and a lot of them would use vague language to imply the impact their campaign had on the video's numbers was bigger than it really was. All of this reporting was still enough to scare YouTube into taking action, allegedly investigating the validity of the video's view count as well as disabling embedding for the video at a certain point. There was also this weird brief period where the video was stuck at second place despite having the higher view count, though this was later fixed, but that is still a weird thing for them to do if that were intentional. But even with all the bad press surrounding it, the clip would stay as the most viewed video for a decent amount of time, and that of course meant it had more time to continue growing. And eventually, on September 8th, 2008, Avril Lavigne's Girlfriend would end up becoming the second first video on YouTube to reach 100 million views. And unlike the rest of our examples, Girlfriend managed to stay on the top of the charts for a little while longer, though it would be resurpassed by Evolution of Dance in May of 2009 once the smoke had settled. In fact, the only reason it stopped being one of the top videos was due to it being removed from the site in late 2009 for unclear reasons, before being re-uploaded to Avril's personal Vivo channel in October. And just for transparency's sake, Wikipedia claims that it was removed in November of 2009, but their source for that claim doesn't actually say that anywhere. I wasn't able to confirm any date in particular, so I'm just using late 2009 as a cop-out because I've worked on this video long enough. I don't want to look anything else up. So in the end, Evolution of Dance remained on top, until it was inevitably superseded by a video of even greater cultural significance, Charlie Bit My Finger, and from that point on, the short-lived trend of faking your way to the top of the most viewed chart seemed to come to a close. The fact that these stories all happened in relatively quick succession simply cannot be a coincidence. These incidents were all some of the earliest examples of this kind of manipulation on the platform, or if nothing else, definitely the most widely publicized examples. And I think the events leading up to all of them were the spark that would slowly grow the user base's preference towards the image of authenticity and transparency within the creators they follow and the website as a whole, which absolutely led us to where the mindsets of a lot of creators are today, for better or worse. And to think, all of that started because two unrelated creatives on opposite ends of the globe happened to like the same song from a Brazilian indie rock band. The idea of botting subscribers or rigging view counts on YouTube is in kind of a weird spot in popular culture, because yeah, it is still this infamous taboo that every creator is aware of and supposedly vigilant about. But at the same time, when was the last time you heard of a major creator getting caught botting subscribers? And even if so, receiving any consequence from it. I do remember hearing a bit about it in the mid to late 2010s with a handful of allegations being thrown around at certain individuals, but it seems like in modern times that really isn't something crossing most serious creators' minds. I mean, since nowadays most big creators can just psychologically manipulate their young viewers into doing nothing but watching them organically. And that's a pretty big difference in the culture between now and back when all of these controversies were happening. Nowadays, YouTube is often seen as a launch pad for media empires or a fun alternative career path for people determined or lucky enough to make it big. But back in 2008 and 2009, sure, you could still make money from YouTube, YouTube, but that feature was only just added, and the idea of making a career off of clout from a video sharing platform was still in its infancy. Hell, clout wasn't even a word back when this shit was happening. So the people involved in the incidents in this video were more motivated at directing nebulous internet attention towards themselves than anything. So these stories are yet another example of just how rapidly YouTube's culture has shifted in the modern era, because something like these three stories would never happen today, and if they did, the people involved would probably get a pipe bomb in the mail from YouTube's legal department. But with all that thesis out of the way, that was the story and the tumultuous aftermath of Music Is My Hot Hot Sex by Cansei De Ser Sexy. I hope you enjoyed. And if music is where I'd like you to touch, then be sure to like this video. And if hey you I don't like your girlfriend, then be sure to subscribe as well. And I'll see you all in the next video.